Man in Gray here with another Man in Gray book review. Today's book is The Familiar, One Rainy Day in May by Mark Z. Danielewski. This book was published in 2015 by Pantheon Books. It's 880 pages. Mark Z. Danielewski is best known as an experimental writer, mainly of horror fiction, and he's best known for his 2000 debut novel, The House of Leaves, which is about a haunted house that's larger on the inside than it is on the outside. But it's also a book about a documentary film that's made about it. So it's kind of a postmodernist novel where it's commenting on the novel itself. And it's a very big, sprawling book. And it was kind of a surprise bestseller, and it's become kind of a cult classic. Danielewski's become a cult writer. He's picked up a group of very devoted fans. So that's his most famous book, House of Leaves. And he followed it up with a couple of other novels, but his most ambitious project by far is this series, The Familiar, which he has conceived of as a 27-volume novel cycle. The inspiration for this were television series like The Wire, or The Sopranos, or Breaking Bad. These TV series that have long story arcs that go over multiple seasons and have large casts. And he wanted to do something similar to that with the novel format. So this is supposedly going to be a 27-volume series, but only 5 of the books have actually been published, and I'll explain why later on in this video. But The Familiar deals with basically about 7 storylines. Some of them take place in Los Angeles. One of them takes place in Singapore. There's one that takes place in Texas, and 2 in Mexico. And then they jump from one storyline to the other, and each storyline is written in a different style of writing. There's a detective story, there's a science fiction story, and so forth. They're all written in kind of different styles. And he plays around with typefaces and fonts. That's one of the things he's known for, is his use of experimental typefaces and so forth. Each storyline has a different font, and the texts are arranged differently. One of the things Danielewski's trying to do here is kind of change the novel from where you're just reading blocks of text to where it's more like a TV show or a movie, where there's a lot of visual elements going on, which throws some people off, and some people don't care for that. But it also makes the books very intriguing to read. So this story, which is subtitled One Rainy Day in May, takes place on March 10th, 2015. And we learned about the basic characters, and I've made some notes here, so I'm going to put on my little spectacles and read you a little bit about this. I'll try to do this very quickly. The main storyline involves the Ibrahim family. There's Xanther Ibrahim, who's a 12-year-old girl, very smart, very outgoing, but she suffers from severe epileptic seizures. And so her family's constantly worried about her health, because at one point she almost died from a seizure. Then there's her mother, Astaire, who's a therapist and who's working on her PhD thesis. But she's having trouble because her PhD advisor doesn't like the thesis she's come up with, and he wants her to start over, and she's almost through with it and doesn't want to do that. So she's butting heads with her advisor while she's trying to maintain her career as a therapist. And then there's Xanther's stepfather, Anwar Ibrahim, who's an Egyptian-born video game developer, and he's working on this video game that he's created, but it's not working properly because there's a bug in it. There's a computer glitch, and it won't run the way it's supposed to, and he's desperately trying to figure out where the bug is and try to get it repaired, because he needs to sell this game because the family's running out of money, and they're depending on him to have this game sold, and they're going to make a lot of money if they're able to sell it, but they can't get the bug fixed out. And so he's kind of deeply worried about trying to get this thing fixed. And then there are the twin daughters, Freya and Shasta, which are are Xanther's stepsisters, uh, twin daughters by Anwar and Aster. And what happens in this opening day, is the couple decide to get Xanther a therapy dog, a dog that can detect uh, epileptic seizures. There's some dogs can be trained to notice the early onset of epileptic seizures so that they can be treated before they go into a full grand mal seizure. And so the dad takes the younger kids out to get a dog bed and everything, and they wind up getting caught in a rainstorm, and the dog bed gets wet, and it's not the one he wanted, but it's the one they have to buy because they've got it wet. Um, and so anyway, eventually Anwar and Xanther go out, and he keeps it a secret for her. He's not telling her what he's going to do. It's supposed to be a big surprise. They go out to get this dog, but then a gigantic rainstorm hits, and it's raining so hard that you can barely see. And to give you an example of how Danielewski plays with typefaces and so forth, I'll see if you can see this on this video. But this is the section about the rain. You can see the text is running diagonally down the page. It's supposed to represent, put it like this maybe. You can see how the text is running along the length of the page, and that's supposed to represent the rain running down the windshield of the car. So what happens is while they're in this huge rainstorm, Xanther hears a little cat crying, and she's the only one who can hear it. And she bolts out of the car and starts running down the street in the pouring rain, and her stepfather's trying to catch her and stop her. And she finds this little black kitten who's almost half drowned on the street, and she scoops him up and takes him back to the car. And she says, "We got to get him home." And so they cancel their trip to pick up the dog and go back home. But it turns out this little kitten is not what it appears to be. This kitten is actually a witch's familiar, which is hence the title, which is a malevolent supernatural being often associated with witches. They're kind of like an assistant to a witch. And so as the book goes on, Xanther and the cat start to develop this really powerful bond. The cat starts to develop a powerful hold over Xanther, where she's afraid to leave the cat and is reluctant even to go to school because she doesn't want to leave the cat alone. And the cat likewise wants to hang around Xanther. They've got this bond that's forming, and the parents are kind of worried about that. The next storyline is also in Los Angeles, but it's in East LA, and it involves Luther Perez, who's a gang member of a big drug gang in Los Angeles, and he raises violent pit bulls, and he has a reputation for being violent himself. He's kind of the enforcer of the gang. And for some reason, the gang leader, the ruler of the gang, is wanting him to take this 14-year-old kid named Hopi into the gang. And Hopi is a kind of a nerdy character who likes to draw a lot. And he doesn't seem to fit in with the other gang members, but he's anxious to join the gang. And so Luther puts him through a series of really violent and dangerous initiation rituals. But at one point, Luther starts hearing a cat calling, crying out. And so he turns his dogs loose to try to find the cat, but they can't find it. Then in the next story, it's probably the most difficult one to understand because it takes place in Singapore, and it's written in kind of pidgin English, a combination of English, Malaysian, and Chinese. And so it's really difficult to get through. But it involves this character named Jing Jing, who's a former drug addict who's living with and it works for a healer named Tran Li, who's a healer, and some people believe she's a witch. And apparently the cat that Xanther found in Los Angeles is Tran Li's cat, because her black cat is missing. And it doesn't explain how this little cat got from Singapore all the way to LA. But again, the cat may have supernatural powers. And Jing Jing is a former drug addict, and he's trying to stay clean, but he's being sorely tempted to get back into drugs because he's under a lot of pressure. His boss, Tran Li, has been hired by a Singaporese billionaire to try to heal his son, who's in a catatonic coma. No medicines, no conventional medicines will cure him and snap him out of it. And so she's trying to develop some kind of healing potion or something to snap him out of it. Then we go to Marfa, Texas, a small town in the middle of West Texas, which is famous for the Marfa Lights. This is a series of mysterious lights, kind of like the aurora borealis, that appear up in the mountains outside of Marfa periodically. There's been various explanations for what they are, but no one agrees. And it's attracted a lot. Marfa's always attracted a lot of kind of UFO fanatics and people like that. Anyway, this is a story of two people, Bobby and Kaz, who are members of a secret computer hacking society, and they have got their hands on a series of these objects called orbs. And these are kind of like crystal balls, but they allow you to see into the future, not just on Earth, but on other planets as well. And what they've discovered is that the future is bleak. What they tend to see is wastelands, but it's not clear if this blasted wasteland is on Earth or it's on another planet. Now, they're in hiding. They're out in Marfa living off the grid because they're in hiding because federal agents are trying to track down all the members of this hacking group and seize their orbs. And several members have already been arrested and they're taken away. And once they're arrested, nobody hears anything about it. They're being held apparently against their will and against constitutional rights and everything because what they're doing is super secret. And so these two are hiding, and they spend the entire book jumping from one place to another, trying to keep one step ahead of the authorities. So it's a kind of science fiction type story. And let's see if I can show you. Yes, and in their stories, I can show you here, the text is often in the shape of an orb or a circle. You have a circular pattern here made in the text. So again, playing around with typefaces and the arrangement of text in that particular story. That's the science fiction story. Then we go back to Los Angeles and meet a guy named Oz Talat, who is a L.A. homicide detective, born in Turkey, comes to the United States and becomes a policeman in L.A., and he's been on the L.A. police force for 27 years, so he's getting close to his retirement. And he's still upset over a crime that happened decades before, an unsolved murder, and he visits the father of the murder victim every year. And today's the anniversary of the murder, and so he goes and visits him. And then he and another police officer are heading out to Glendale, California, when they come upon a car wreck, and there's ambulance there, so they get out and see what's going on, and they're rushing this person into an ambulance. And they notice there's a house next door with the door open. They go in there and they find 3 murdered people. There's 3 bodies that have been murdered. So they've stumbled onto not only a car accident, but a homicide case. And Oz is not assigned to the case, but he becomes fascinated and he's convinced that there's some kind of connection to this and other stuff going on. The car accident, gang violence, he thinks there's a connection there, but he can't put his finger yet on what the connection is. Then we have another story that also takes place in Los Angeles about a guy named Shanornik, who's a Armenian immigrant, who's a cab driver. And a few months before, he had been in a wreck in which he hit a police car, and he's being charged with that. But he says it wasn't his fault. The light was green, and it's the police car's fault for not moving out of the intersection. And he has a witness, but the witness doesn't show up on the trial day, and so he's desperately trying to call the witness to get him to show up in court so that he can, get out of this, because he's afraid he's going to get fined or even arrested for causing this wreck. And then later on, he meets up with a friend of his who's working on a documentary book about the Armenian genocide that took place during World War I and just after World War I, in which the Ottoman Turks massacred thousands of Armenians. And so he's trying to put together a massive book about what happened there. And then the final storyline takes place in Mexico. There's a guy named Iguandorno, who's a guy whose job is to smuggle exotic animals from South and Central America into Mexico, for his boss, who's a giant drug cartel leader who's nicknamed the Mayor. And he collects these exotic animals and turns them loose in this area that he has, and he brings in people to hunt them. So various exotic animals, and so he's doing that. And that section of the book is told, I can find it here, told in little short paragraphs, almost like poetry. So as you can see here, the sections set in Mexico are done like this. And in between all that, this guy is meditating about the nature of existence. He's sort of a philosopher and smuggler of animals. So as you can see from that kind of summary, there's a lot of stuff going on in this book. And at some point, all of these different storylines are supposed to come together and connect. I haven't read all 5 volumes. I've only read the first 2.5, but by the 5th volume, everything's supposed to come together and collect. It seems odd to say this for a book that's almost 900 pages long, but not a whole lot happens in this first volume. There's a lot of exposition. They're describing the characters, kind of setting up the scenes. It's really in the second volume that things start popping, but you've got to plow through almost 900 pages before you get to the second volume. Now, as Med said before, this was conceived as a 27-volume novel series, but only 5 of the volumes have been published. And the reason for that is that after the 5th volume came out, which completes season 1, the first storyline, Pantheon Books announced that they weren't going to publish any more volumes because they've been losing money on it. Now, these are paperback books, but they're very expensively produced because they're printed in thick, glossy paper. And this book probably weighs 7 or 8 pounds. It's a heavy book, even though it's a paperback book, and it has sewn bindings. And I don't know if you can see this, but the binding is in pink thread because pink is the symbolic color of the familiar. Every time the word familiar pops up in here, it's printed in pink. So the color pink has a symbolic importance. So, and there's full color in here. There's photographs. There's a lot of complicated typography. This is a very expensive series of books to produce. And the problem with doing a novel series like this is that the farther along you get in the series, the fewer readers there are. You know, a lot of people read the first volume, slightly fewer read the second, and slightly fewer read the third. By the time you're to volumes 5, you've got a hardcore fan base, and that's it. You don't get you can't read these books out of sequence. You can't pick up volume 4 and understand at all what's going on. You have to start with volume 1 and go all the way through. And so Pantheon said, well, this is costing us too much money and we're not going to make any more. But apparently by that point, by the time the 5th volume came out, Danielewski had already written 10 volumes. He'd written 5 more volumes in the second season. And so he's announced, when we talked about this, he said, well, it's only been interrupted or paused. He didn't say the series has been canceled. So apparently he still wants to publish the whole 27 volumes eventually. He also said that he spent 9 years planning this book series before he even started writing it. So this is, one of the really most ambitious projects that I can have heard of in recent years. So it is possible that we may have the other volumes, at least 6 through 10 in the future, maybe by another publisher, maybe in a different format or something. But right now, all we have are the first 9. I say all we have. Each one of the 5 volumes is 880 pages. So you're talking about over 4,000 pages of material here. So this is a pretty daunting, ambitious work. And so I'm not sure that this is the ideal book to start with if you haven't read any of Danielewski's work before. A lot of people have read The House of Leaves, but even that is kind of a difficult book. It's about 700 pages long, and as I said, it's very complicated, lots of different plot lines and jumps from one form of storytelling to another. So if you want to kind of dip your toe into Danielewski, before you try something like this, you might want to read his novella, The 50-Year Sword, which is only about 100 pages long. It does have a lot of the same typography tricks and stuff that you see in this book. It's interesting that when so The 50-Year Sword may be the way you start, then you might want to go on to read The House of Leaves, and then maybe this if you're still into it. The critical opinion for this book when it came out in 2015 was quite divisive. It was a book that really provoked a lot of people. The New York Times reviewer said that this book and the other books in the series are probably the greatest American novel written in the 21st century. Whereas the reviewer for the Guardian newspaper said that this book was incoherent, didn't make any sense. It was hard. It was pretentious, and he basically just dismissed it as garbage. He said almost anybody who reads this is going to give up after about 50 pages because it doesn't make any sense. Well, it does make sense if you keep reading the other volumes. It is hard to follow at first because you've got all these separate stories that don't seem to have anything to do with each other, and each one is written in a different style. And some people don't like, as I said before, the typography and the experimental use of text and so forth. Once you get used to that, though, you'll find that Danielewski is a very good writer. He can tell. He's a good storyteller. Each one of these stories has a really gripping, suspenseful hook to it. And each one's written in a different style, which is a tricky thing to pull off. You know, there's the hard-boiled detective, the Turkish guy's hard-boiled detective style. There's the science fiction writing. The thing that puts some people off, too, is the Xanther stories. The stories about the Ibrahim families are written with a whole bunch of parentheses. Sometimes you'll have 4, even 5 parentheses in one sentence. And again, he's drawing attention to the fact that this is writing. You know, it's one of the keys to postmodernism is the meta nature of it. You're commenting on the fictional nature of the books as well. And there's also a couple of characters that I had mentioned before that apparently are either aliens or computer bots that comment on the action periodically as you go through here. And that, I think, is an idea that he may have gotten from Joseph McElroy's gigantic novel, Women and Men, which we may talk about later on. Women and Men is the longest novel written by an American, and it's also incredibly complicated and very repetitive. But it has these characters that are aliens that are commenting on the action, and that happens in this book too. They're either aliens or computer bots that are commenting on what's going on in the book. So anyway, that's kind of, I'm sorry I've gone so long here, but it's a difficult book to condense very easily. And if it sounds something like you might be interested in, you might again try either The 50-Year Sword or House of Leaves. And then if you feel up to it, you can tackle The Familiar. Like I said, he's developed a fanatical cult following. There's people that are just obsessed with all the ins and outs and the complexities of these books. And hopefully he'll come out with another book at some point in the future. Maybe not part of The Familiar, but something else. Anyway, that's the book for today. The book is The Familiar, Volume 1, One Rainy Day in May. The author is Mark Z. Danielewski, and this has been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.